Okay, so hello, my name is Jessica Donis, and today I'm going to be doing my signature assignment presentation on homosexuality and the social learning theory. So, to begin, the introduction to my sexual variation for homosexuality, as defined by Yarber in 2021, is an emotional and sexual attraction between persons of the same sex. And then the theory that I chose is going to be the social learning theory. Now, this is a theory that was initially proposed by Albert Bandura, and this basically suggests that people learn behaviors, values, and attitudes, and they mainly do this through the key concepts of observation, imitation, and modeling. And this is information pulled from the American Psychological Association in 2018. And as I was saying, these key components of watching and learning and actually getting positive and negative reinforcement are the key players when it comes to the influence of the social environment that people live in. And then for the significance of this issue is that homosexuality has received mixed responses throughout the years, whether this be acceptance to discrimination, and then understanding these variations through the theory of the social learning theory can actually help us unpack some of these social influences on acceptance or the stigma that homosexuality has received throughout the years. Now, when it actually comes to the application of the social learning theory to homosexuality, individuals may observe whether homosexuality is accepted or rejected, and this can be through family attitudes, the way that media represents homosexuality, alongside peer and community behaviors, depending on like where you live, if you're more liberal or conservative state, just for an example. Now, if homosexuality is depicted positively and accepted within someone's environment, they'll be more likely to express their attraction openly alongside actually accepting views towards other people's sexual identities. While if you are in a negative environment and receiving negative reinforcement, such as bullying or shame, this can actually lead to internalized stigma or actually suppression of your own sexual identity. Now, for a bit of a historical view of homosexuality, this data is being pulled from McManus in 2014 and Show in 2016. And the timeline and time period that I'm going to be focusing on is mid-century Mexico, which is ranging from the 1940s to the 1970s. Now, in regards to a religious context, which is primarily going to be the cultural context of this time period, mid-century Mexico was deeply rooted in Catholic values, where you're going to be seeing a lot of traditional gender roles and a strong emphasis on family honor. And that's actually where this concept of machismo actually stemmed from. So during this time period, there is a widespread amount of rejection and silence when it came to homosexuality, where it was not openly discussed and it was actually seen as something immoral. And the social norms were around machismo during this time period created strict male dominance and heterosexuality as markers of honor and manhood, and what was seen to be honoring the households. Now, homosexual men are often labeled as being feminine, sinful, or even disgraced, and were forced into secrecy, so they weren't even able to actively express their own sexual identity. Now, from a more Catholic doctrine influence that you can see during this time period, the Catholic Church being dominant in Mexico condemned homosexuality as sinful and unnatural, and the religious communities fostered an environment where deviation from, heterosexuality was morally condemned. And it was actually considered that homosexuality was a spiritual disorder and was viewed as a threat to traditional family values. And McManus actually discusses himself that the religion functioned as the primary institution of social control, whether this be through shaping moral attitudes and sustaining a systemic rejection of homosexuality identities. And then actually the application of the theory itself even further is that through these models of observation, right? So children and adults observed priests, parents, and many key community figures, which is very important for a lot of Latin countries, who actually modeled this condemnation of homosexuality. And there's a lot of negative reinforcement, whether this be punishment, shame, gossip, all of these different factors played such a large role in actually discouraging same-sex attraction or even being able to express it openly. And over time, individuals internalized the belief that heterosexuality was the only acceptable orientation. And this is a learned norm that was rooted in religious morality for Mexico in the mid-20th century. Now, when you kind of flip the script now and you look at contemporary US views of homosexuality for the past 5 years, actually, according to Gray in 2015, there was an increase in public acceptance for, the homosexuality itself. And this is primarily going to be because there is an increase in LGBTQ plus individuals, whether this be in politics, entertainment, and education, and actually cause for there to be a normalization, right, of these same-sex relationships, especially among younger generations. And later on, I'll go on to mention the role that technology has actually played. And even though there has been political backlash in more conservative states, the overall cultural support for homosexuality has expanded, whether this be through advocacy for trying to push more accepting and inclusive legislation, representation, and inclusive policies. Now, when it comes to the media portrayal of homosexuality, according to McEnroy in 2017, mainstream media now includes a variety of LGBTQ plus narratives portraying queer people as multidimensional rather than just your typical stereotypes. And then it's actually through these shows like Pose, Euphoria, and Heartstopper, which actually humanize gay characters and actually are creating a new model for people to be able to observe instead of just having this one skewed lens of just, heterosexual relationships. And media is actually acting as this new teacher, as McEnroe coins, which is going to be shaping these public beliefs and validating queer experiences. And then technology's influence today. There was actually an interesting example that I was able to find in literature, which is from Huang in 2016, which actually uses Grindr, which is an online dating and social networking site for queer people, where they were actually able to facilitate the ability to improve HIV prevention, and they were actually able to use this platform to not only expand, right, the ability to people to be able to network and meet new people who are also queer, but also to be able to expand knowledge in regards to sexual education. And they were also having so many more information about regular screening for different STIs and all of this information, which I found was really interesting because it showcased how technology was able to do both peer modeling and observational learning for LGBTQ plus people, while also incorporating a concept of public health into, what you would consider just like a regular dating application. Now, this social learning theory and concept, especially nowadays, you actually see individuals learning from media figures, online communities, and peers who embrace homosexuality openly. And this has created a new environment from a negative reinforcement that you saw in mid-century Mexico, in comparison to now there being a positive reinforcement for there to be self-acceptance and social validation. And then we're actually having new models, right? These new people to observe, where it's showing that heterosexual audiences themselves are now more exposed to queer relationships, and they're realizing that even though they themselves may not identify as homosexual, that it is something very prevalent, something that is very normal within the society, which is causing even heterosexual people to be able to embrace homosexuality more open. And it's just this constant and increasing exposure and reinforcement that's just going to be causing a general shape in our cultural norms. Now, all in all, in conclusion, so the social learning theory effectively explains how social attitudes have continuously shaped over time, and homosexuality is just one sexual variation that really brings this home. As we saw in 20th century Mexico, there is negative reinforcement of shame, especially through the lens of religion, in comparison to now, where we are able to have media being able to just affirm all of these new orientations that people are able to see. And the theory itself hasn't changed. I think that's really key to notice, is that the theory hasn't changed. What's changed is the way that people adapt to behaviors and models. Now, when it comes to the next 5 years, I believe there's going to be an increased normalization, even though there's still going to be political backlash, especially, just looking at our own political climate that we have today. But I do believe that in the next 100 years, we're going to have much greater global exposure, and technology will continue to increase, and the younger generations will continue to have greater information when it comes to all of these different sexual variations to make their own educated opinion. So thank you very much. That was my presentation, and I hope you found it insightful, especially for homosexuality and the social learning theory. Thank you.